Hello, you're watching Talking Europe on France 24. I'm Catherine Nicholson, and today I am in Brussels. I'm here with the United States ambassador to Belgium, who is also currently acting US representative to the European Union. This after his predecessor, Gordon Sondland, was fired by President Trump after testifying in the impeachment trial earlier this year. Ronald Gidwitz, thank you very much for having us.
Catherine, thank you for having me.
As I mentioned, your predecessor as ambassador or representative to the EU, Gordon Sondland, was fired from that job after giving his testimony that he'd followed the president's orders to negotiate a quid pro quo with Ukraine. Do you see Ukraine as part of your remit in this job?
My job is to work with the European Union and the United States and to build bridges and strengthen our already very strong relationship.
But specifically on Ukraine, are you intending to have any involvement with the administration on that?
No.
At the moment, the dominant topic for everybody is COVID-19. Some recent news that's impacting Americans particularly right now, the European Union recommending that US travellers are not yet allowed to come into the EU unless they're resident here. Were you surprised at that decision?
Not at all. In fact, I'd had conversations with various officials in the European Union about when and if, when we're going to open our borders. The real issue is safety. Make sure that Europeans are safe and make sure that Americans are safe. And currently, the Europeans are further along on the disease track, if you will, than the United States is right now. I'm sure that there will be more exceptions to the rule, more travel back and forth, but on an exception basis for a while until the disease gets under control in the U.S.
Is the U.S. government actually talking to individual EU states on a bilateral basis about, so-called air bridges, for example, to allow travel to and from specific individual countries?
Well, clearly the European Union will make the decision on a bilateral basis. Member states have that authority and that responsibility. Right now, our conversations have continued at the European Union level, not at the bilateral state level.
Just looking at tourism, for example, it's a massive issue in Europe about the COVID-19 travel situation. 9 million people from just 3 European countries visited the United States in 2019. Potentially quite a lot of tourism revenue, low infection rates in Germany and France, for example. Is that something that could be considered, air bridges?
I don't know exactly how it's going to be resolved. Clearly, we would love to see two-way traffic, two-way tourism. But again, the issue gets to be, how do we keep all of our citizens safe? And that's what Washington is focused on right now, and very obviously the European Union is as well.
Okay, I'd like to talk about a drug that's been in the news recently, believed to cut recovery times for COVID-19 patients. It's called Remdesivir. Now, there's been some consternation in Europe after it emerged that the United States Department of Health was buying up almost all the production of this drug for the next 3 months. One complaint from European scientists has been that Europeans contributed to the testing and the development. There are suggestions that President Trump's slogan, America First, is also applying to human health.
Well, we're anxious to make sure that everybody has the benefit of the European and the American technology. So we're working very closely with the European Union to make sure that not just Remdesivir, but also the various vaccines which are under development will be available and plentiful when they finally come to market.
But for the next 3 months, almost all Remdesivir is for the United States.
Quite frankly, I believe what's happening is they're creating more production right now so that there will be supplies for Europe as well.
Now, there's still something that's a little unclear from earlier this year regarding vaccines. There was a talk that the US administration had tried to take over a German company that produces vaccines called CureVac. Did that happen? Was there an attempt to take that over?
My understanding is that's fake news. And in fact, the company repudiated that news wherever it came from. As you know, some of our mutual enemies have not been very kind to us during this infection.
Mutual enemies meaning?
Well, Russia, disinformation from China in particular have been virulent, more virulent in some cases than, frankly, the virus itself. Stories that have appeared in the news really since the beginning, have been in many cases wrong, and they've been the creation of both Russia and China.
And you believe that this story about CureVac?
I don't know where it came from. I do know that the company has repudiated the story itself, whether it was a misunderstanding, whether it was a piece of fake news. The reality is it is not true, and it never was true.
This does come at a time of trade tensions between the US and the EU that have been going on for some time. The EU Trade Commissioner spoke out a couple of days ago about the number of national security investigations launched by the US against EU goods. He suggested that these are politically motivated rather than based on genuine national security concerns. What do you make of that accusation?
I mean, we've been working and trying to have a trade agreement with the European Union certainly since I got here. I remember back in 2018, those conversations took place in Washington, D.C. at the White House, and they're ongoing. Hopefully we'll see some fruit from those conversations sometime between now and the end of the year.
I'm sure you know the WTO is considering a counter-complaint from the European Union about US support for Boeing, the aerospace company. This could lead to retaliatory tariffs for what have been imposed by Washington. One might ask, with this back and forth that's been going on for some time, why not settle these disputes now?
What a wonderful idea, but it takes two people to settle them. And my guess is they will get settled. They will get settled hopefully in a comprehensive fashion. But there are a wide variety of issues that we agree on, and let's focus on some of those as opposed to the few issues that keep us apart.
So, for example, you do believe that the aerospace dispute will be settled at some point?
Well, there are two issues. One of them is the Boeing issue. The other one is the Airbus issue. The Airbus issue has been adjudicated, and we're still waiting, and who knows when that decision will come forward. Obviously, then there may be an opportunity to use those two trade issues to settle themselves, or there may be other issues involved as well.
And in the meantime, is it not counterproductive, as many have suggested, to have ongoing trade disputes between these two enormous economic giants?
Look, you never want to have disputes, but let's not forget that we've got $1.3 trillion worth of trade that takes place every year between the United States and Europe. It is incredibly important. We've got 15 million jobs split on both sides that are dependent upon this trade. And candidly, when you look at the amount of issues and the size of the transactions involved in dispute, it's dwarfed by the $1.3 trillion worth of business that we do together.
Just moving on to another issue, US troops stationed in Europe, specifically, Germany, where the greatest number are based, have recently announced the US plans to pull out 9,500 troops from Germany. Can you tell us what the strategy is behind this troop relocation?
We'll be hearing about it, I'm sure, in the next few weeks. This is not pulling out, this is redistribution. We are constantly looking at how best to optimize the defense of Europe. We have an ironclad guarantee of Europe's defense, which we will not violate.
Is there a problem with them being stationed in Germany?
The question gets to be, how best do you array those troops, given the fact that the static model that was looked at 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago when the troops were originally put there may not necessarily be appropriate today. So the question gets to be, for whatever disagreement, whatever issue that comes to the fore where troops are required, where should they be best coming from? Mm-hmm. And so that evaluation and analysis is being done now. The Department of Defense, the United States Congress will make the decision together with our allies, and we'll all find out about the same time.
Well, just on the motivation for it, though, a Pentagon spokesman, Jonathan Hoffman, said that the move will strengthen NATO and it will reassure the United States allies. But the Germans definitely don't sound reassured. The transatlantic coordinator for Angela Merkel said the decision was completely unacceptable, and also that nobody in Washington had actually forewarned Germany before it was announced to the world. There is a suspicion that this is perhaps about punishing Germany for not meeting its NATO defense spending commitments.
I actually think that the Defense Department spokesperson was much more eloquent.
So you don't believe it's to do with punishing?
Absolutely not. We're not in the business of punishing our allies. This is how best to defend Europe.
There's been pushback in the last couple of days from EU allies France and Germany, as well as Egypt and Jordan, against the US-backed plan for Israel to annex Palestinian territory in line with the Trump administration's Middle East plan. Considering this pushback and other protestations, is the administration still backing this Middle East plan?
Let's remember what the plan is, and that was a vehicle to begin negotiation between the parties. This problem has existed since 1948. It's not going to go away until the parties sit down and negotiate it.
Well, there's an accusation that the plan actually is counterproductive and prevents the parties from sitting down around the table by not respecting the 1967 borders.
Well, let's remember they haven't been terribly successful up till now, have they? I would argue that what we need to have is a fresh subject for discussion, and that's what the president has given.
And the 4 states I mentioned, including France and Germany, said that if the plan does go ahead, this would have consequences for their relations with Israel, at least. Does that concern you?
Israel will have to take into account whatever consequences there might be as they look towards what their actions will be. What's most important is that the parties sit down and negotiate. I don't know that it's terribly helpful to have France and Germany threatening Israel before the fact. The point of the plan was to create an object for discussion. And so we would just encourage the Palestinians and the Israelis to sit down and start negotiating.
Is it possible that this letter might give the US administration pause for thought? That seems to be the intention.
Well, I think the issue really is, does it give the Israelis and the Palestinians pause to thought, to think about it, rather than to sit down, and that's somewhat worrisome.
All right, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much for being our guest, Ronald Gidwitz.
Well, thank you for having me, Catherine.
Thank you very much. And thanks to you for watching the programme as well. Hope to see you soon on France 24.
Covid-19 is a new disease. Scientists, researchers, healthcare workers and others are working together to better understand the virus, how it spreads, and how we can protect ourselves, our loved ones and everyone else. But science changes and evolves over time. And even though changes may seem confusing, they are for our good. So be open to changes, new facts and recommendations. Let's all prevent the spread of Covid-19.